Setting sail. The Endurance set sail for Buenos Aires on Saturday, the 8th of August 1914, after receiving a telegram from the Admiralty which simply read, "Proceed." From England to South Georgia. The journey from Plymouth to Buenos Aires was fairly uneventful. However, a few crew members were dropped due to drunkenness and insubordinate. As I read Shackleton's journey to you now, I would like you to just make little notes, because as I go through it, I'm going to say this would be a good point for a checkpoint in your timeline. So when we get to certain main events, that's what I'll say, and you can make a note of it, and then and pause the video, I suggest, while you make that note, and then carry on listening. And then those will be your checkpoints for your timeline that you'll create in the next couple of days. We will also send you through a picture of the timeline we create in school, and that will help you too. So, number 1, setting sail. The Endurance set sail for Buenos Aires on Saturday the 8th of August 1914 after receiving a telegram from the Admiralty which simply read, "Proceed." So I recommend you putting this as one of your checkpoints. From England to South Georgia. The journey from Plymouth to Buenos Aires was fairly uneventful. You might want that as a checkpoint as well, just travelling through the Atlantic. So setting sail, then travelling through the Atlantic. However, a few members were dropped due to drunkenness and insubordination. Luckily, the experienced Canadian seaman William Bakewell joined the crew, as did a plucky 19-year-old stowaway, Percy Blackborough. The crew spent a month making final preparations at, I'm going to try and say this right, Grytviken whaling station, the southernmost outpost of the British Empire. Ready at last, the ship left South Georgia on the 5th of December 1914 and headed for the South Sandwich Islands. So that will be another checkpoint, the ship leaving South Georgia. In Shackleton's words, the long days of preparation were over and the adventure lay ahead. And this page is a map of the route that the Endurance took, and it seems a little bit strange that it kind of looks like just one big circle. But we're going to find out why the boat got close to the Antarctica and then decided to kind of turn around. So, into the Weddell Sea. This will be another checkpoint in your timeline. Soon after entering the Weddell Sea, Endurance began to encounter pack ice, which resembled something close to a giant jigsaw puzzle of ice stretching over 700 miles ahead of the ship. Occasionally the foresail was reefed, so that dangerous growlers might be spotted and avoided. Shackleton was fond of conning and working from the crow's nest, as he could see for miles. It might be worth looking at your glossary at the end of the PDF, or in a previous English lesson it was posted on the blog, to find out what those words mean, or Googling them. Animal life was abundant here and included crab-eater seals, humpback whales, ringed penguins, and many other seabirds. Yes, they ate penguins. Okay, I just realised that the next page is the glossary, so you can use that for understanding that previous paragraph. Pack ice. Progress was slow and laborious. Of the 700-odd miles of pack ice, the last 250 miles consisted of tough, solid ice up to 3 feet thick, with pieces up to a mile long. The ship would repeatedly ram the ice at half speed to weaken it and carve a V into the ice edge. Then the ship would fire its engines and drive full speed into the ice like a giant wedge. Hurley filmed the process while hanging below on the jig boom, and you can see Hurley, if you just look at my mouse just there, filming the process. Initial contact with the pack ice was exciting, but it soon became something of a concern. As the ice became thicker and tighter, Endurance had to work harder and harder to break through. Here comes your next timeline checkpoint, the Endurance being stuck. Finally, after battling bravely through the 700 miles of pack ice, Endurance was overcome. As far as the eye could see, she was completely surrounded. After waiting 10 days, Shackleton ordered the fires to be put out in order to conserve the fuel. Before attempting to break free, he waited for the conditions to improve. During this time, there was an opportunity to test the motor sled, and the men had time to relax. On February the 14th, Shackleton ordered a good head of steam, and the Endurance creaked and groaned as she tried to free herself from the cruel grip of the ice. For over 48 hours, the crew attacked the ice furiously with ice chisels, picks, and saws. The little ship eventually moved, although it was soon beset again, which means stuck. 400 yards of heavy ice lay between her and open water. Exhausted and beaten, all the crew could do now was wait. A change of plans. Shackleton briefed the men on a new course of action. Endurance would now become their winter base. Hoping that spring would bring better fortune, he planned to keep the men busy, training the dogs and preparing for the ice to break up. But how far would they drift before that day came? Dog igloos were built out on the ice made from wood and snow. Overjoyed to be off the ship, the animals soon settled into Dogtown. McNeish constructed a stove, which became a popular spot for the crew to hang out. At the same time, the inside of the ship was remodeled to improve life on board. The new living quarters, always bustling with activity, were known as the Ritz. The dogs were divided into teams, and training continued over several months, pulling sledges and learning to work together. The dogs and the crew quickly became firm friends. Apart from the training, the crew had plenty of things to keep them active. Whenever possible, they would try to catch penguins to increase their food stocks, and the constant build-up of ice on the ship needed to be removed at regular intervals. Stores were reorganized in case they needed to be removed from the ship quickly. So that could be a timeline in your order of events as kind of bunking down and waiting for spring. Winter months. The crew passed the time fishing, hunting penguins, and taking scientific measurements. Vibrations and pressure ridges in the ice meant that the men had to be extremely careful when they were out on the floe. As May and June went by, the expedition passed into twilight and long, dark days lit only by the moon. Meanwhile, the dog teams began holding races. In June, the crew held an Antarctic derby, with Frank Wild snatching an exciting victory over Frank Hurley. Despite the pressures of leadership, Shackleton knew it was vital to keep the crew's morale high. On Midwinter's Day, 21st of June, the crew celebrated with speeches, songs, and rousing rendition of the national anthem. A severe blizzard a few weeks later saw winds of between 60 and 90 miles an hour, and Dogtown was buried under 5 feet of snow. Finally, in early July, the sun began to return. As the ice floe continued to buckle, provisions were made for emergency evacuation of the ship. New kennels were built on the upper deck, and tensions mounted as the pressure around the Endurance continued to grind ice against the hull. Soon after, loud cracks were heard from the ice as pressure forged huge blocks up into the air, and the dogs were hurried back onto the ship. And then we have quite a dramatic picture of isolation. That ship stuck in that huge, massive ice floe. Endurance was now 500 miles from the nearest civilization. Okay, next bit, pressure. Another roaring blizzard heaved the ice into a maze of hummocks, and as the pressure around the ship continued to grow, the crew realized they might have to escape at any minute. Intense pressure on all sides began to push the ship up out of the water. By October, Endurance was tilted at a 30-degree angle, and still the ice showed no mercy. Finally, the ship began to crack as it was twisted out of shape. I think this is a good point to have another checkpoint. So being pushed up out of the ice at a 30-degree angle and then starting to crack. A loud bang was heard and water flooded in. Luckily, McNeish managed to fix the dangerous leak, but conditions continued to worsen. With pressure ridges rising all around them, Shackleton reviewed his plans to evacuate the ship, which was being crushed from all directions. The force of millions of tons of ice made it too perilous to stay on board. As the ice roared deafeningly, the men were ordered off the Endurance and onto the ice. They set up a temporary camp where they would be safe from harm, and a new plan of action could be made. Endurance creaked and groaned as the strain increased. This might be another checkpoint. So the men having to get off the ship and the Endurance being left alone on the ice to be squashed Loud cracks and deafening sounds were heard as the ice slowly crushed the cross bracing of the ship. Frank Worsley wrote, "The behaviour of our ship in the ice has been magnificent. It will be sad if such a brave little craft should be finally crushed in the remorseless, slowly strangling grip of the Weddell pack, after 10 months of the bravest and most gallant fight ever put up by a ship." That would be great to add into your monologues. Despite such grim circumstances, Shackleton remained positive in front of his crew. "So now we'll go home," he remarked calmly. A new challenge rested on his shoulders. Their mission now was to survive. And then this is the final page and the final point in your timeline, a sad moment in the ship's life. "We were helpless intruders in a strange world," Shackleton wrote. "Our lives dependent upon the play of grim elementary forces that made a mock of our puny efforts. And then it came. On the 27th of October, the brave ship that had struggled so far was now crushed beyond hope of repair. Endurance sank a little, her deck breaking up gradually, and then water began to pour in. The state of Endurance left all the crew heartbroken. She had battled 1,500 miles of ice only to meet this sad fate."